Okay.
All right.
Just for a
Elsa,
moment.
Elsa, are you playing something? I don't hear anything in
My
regard to
heart
Just
lay through my hand, let the way be open. Sing through my heart, lay through my hand, let the way be open. Sing through my voice, lay through my hand, let the way be open. Sing through my voice, lay through my hand, let the way be open. Sing through my voice, lay through my hand, let the way be open. Sing through my voice, lay through my hand, let the way be open. Sing through my voice, lay through my hand, let the way be open.
Thank you so much. We are ready and we are streaming live on YouTube, and we have several spiritual companions here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Whitney. I'm the creative director for SDI, and this is a free gathering for our spiritual companioning community. I'm in my home in Seattle, and I would like to acknowledge the Duwamish people who are indigenous to this place, and acknowledge that they are here and their wisdom continues to teach us. They continue to fight for federal recognition for a treaty they signed in 1851. And the federal government has not honored that treaty, and myself personally and SDI supports the Duwamish people in that fight. We have two wonderful weavers with us this morning to guide us in ancestral and earth honoring wisdom, Tamira Cousett and Elsa Asher. Tamira is a student and medium of ancestral and earth honoring wisdom, who's committed to centering personal wellness in service to greater cultural healing. Her Ori and spiritual path have conspired to guide her towards studying emergent and embodied ancestral liberation and healing practices, Brazilian earth honoring traditions, and a West African Ifa Orisa tradition. Elsa is a somatics practitioner and kohene, or Hebrew ritualist. Their work focuses on healing developmental and intergenerational trauma, is rooted in depathologization, and committed to ongoing unsettling, anti-oppression, and anti-racism practice. Tamira and Elsa, thank you so much for being here and for holding the space for us. Take it away.
thank you, Matt, and SDI and Lizzie and all the folks behind the scenes and organizationally who invited us and made this happen. I just want to start with a prayer. I'm on Lenape lands, on southern Lenape lands in Philadelphia, and I want to offer just prayer and recognition to the Lenape people, to their ancestors and living descendants, affirming their indigenous sovereignty and the truth of their longstanding stewardship of this land that I'm a guest on. And offer whatever is pleasing about this conversation to them as a gift.
Ashe. Thank you, Elsa. And I also would like to offer recognition and gratitude and love to the Eno and the Catawba folk, indigenous folks on the land that I am blessed to call home right now, and deep gratitude for their continued stewardship, their spirits being present with my family and my children on this land. And yes, may everything that we're offering here be an offering. May it be so pleasing, and may it be balm. I want to also take a moment and pray out loud and welcome in my people, my ancestors, because I'm sitting here and also like I roll really deep with my people and they're here. And I want to take a moment, even though people don't see them, you see me, which is the embodiment of my people. I want to call them in and invite my elders in, as is protocol almost, you know, to invite our people in to be with us and to sit with us and to guide our words and to correct us when we step off course and to be graceful and good with us. So I'm going to do that. Egungun, kiki egungun, eguni kuran ran feawo, ku opwaipwai, odo sobafun lewo, iguni ku, batabango egunde, biaba fatori, nala egunde, she, asheo. Welcome, bright, wise, loving, and benevolent ancestors, my bright, wise, and benevolent ancestors. I love you. Welcome, greetings, and greetings to all the ancestors of everyone here present on this call. Bright and benevolent ones, we ask you to lean in, to shepherd over our time together. Let it be nourishing. Let it be an offering to collective healing and liberation and remembering who our people are and remembering our belonging and showing up with right action, right thought, and right words to uphold the path of liberation and to show up for one another. So let this be an offering. We give deep thanks and gratitude and love to the other ancestors that walk with us, those that are of path and practice and spiritual traditions, you bright, benevolent, and loving beings that have also conspired for us to be here in this moment. Alafia, thank you. We recognize your power and we love you. And we ask you to lean in, lean in, lean in, and let it be good. Let our time together be so nourishing and generative. Welcome and thank you, and to the spirit of the earth. Arvong, Atecha, Ileaye, Aryord, we love you. Thank you for these bodies. Thank you, thank you, thank you for this time together. Thank you for these relationships and connections that are being woven through these bodies. We welcome you. We ask you to ground our container and our time together here. Let it be so good. Let it be grounded in your love for us. We thank you. Lean in. Our hearts are open and we are listening. Ashe. Sheo.
Brucha at Shechina Elotinu Ruach Halam Shechiatnu Vikiamatnu Vehigiatnu Lisman Hazeh. Thank you to the Spirit and Creator who has brought us to this moment and allowing me and Tamira and our people to be in dialogue, and for all those gathered here today who are listening now and will listen later, for all of them and their ancestors to be here and for us to get to be in connection. Such a gift. Brucha at Shechina Eloteinu Ruach Haolam Machaya Hametim Barachamim Rabim. Thank you to the one who enlivens our ancestors, enlivens the dead, who heals and repairs that which has happened, who heals and repairs those who have passed, and heals and repairs us. Rucha at Shekhinah. Blessed is the feminine name of God in a restoration of undoing the harms of patriarchy, and the way that speaking of God or the divine in the masculine conjugation of words has made us believe in the false illusion, the delusion of patriarchal power. Moda ani lefanayach rachai v'kayam shechazarta bi nishmati bechemla rabba amunatecha. Thank you to Creator and Spirit that restores my soul to me this morning and every morning of my life. And I just ask that my ancestors speak through me and guide me and admonish me and love me so that I can continue to be a face for them in the world and what we're committed to.
Ashe.
So for everyone listening, Tamira and I kind of open with prayers and just take a moment to notice what is happening in your body, what you feel, what you notice in your surroundings. I like to always remind us of our somatic practices, like we can look around in our space and orient. Resma Menachem teaches look at where the doors and windows are. Like we also have the parts of us that remember being scared or deal with lack of safety in our present lives. And so there's a part of us that likes to know how we would get out of the space we're in, and doing that helps us be present. He also talks about twisting, using your hips and actually twisting with your hips so that you're using the psoas muscle, moving your neck. All of these are orienting and grounding practices, because really what Tamira made words for our talk, but really what we're, so that people could have a sense of what might happen, but really what we're doing today is just showing up to the moment in prayer and connection with our ancestors, and then allowing something to emerge that we actually don't know what that will be. Like this moment hasn't happened yet, and this particular configuration hasn't happened yet.
Thank you, Elsa, for sharing that. And also, yes, love to Resma, and just encouraging folks to do those somatic practices. If anything was missing there, do what grounds you and helps you to be nourished and feel safe in your body and in the space that you're in. And also take time to be with an intention or a prayer for your holding, that you're holding for this time together. It's really potent and it's really powerful, and it helps to feed into the container. So being present with that is super lovely and helpful. And yes, this thing is emergent in the spirit of liberation and decolonizing, not coming with an agenda, but actually being in relationship and in dialogue and in communication and letting that flow through, rather than got a lesson plan and some bullet points and we're going to do this thing right now like this. So praise.
Something I want to say in response to that is I feel like our collaboratorship has been such a learning experience of that, where it's when we try to come with this or when I stayed sort of identified and attached to but here's our plan, and you're I just remember this moment Tamira was put that watch away, put that outline down, we are flowing with the moment. You actually know what's happening and what to do next, and you were just put those tools down, and those aren't the tools that we need. And I think what's very orienting in this way of being and working together and like seeing what will emerge is really tracking like what makes us feel connected, like what helps us feel connected to ourselves, what helps us feel connected to the land that we're on, to our loved ones, to those that we live with, and what helps us feel connected in this moment. And like I think sometimes where we can get really lost is like being so focused on like what you're saying, the agenda of the thing, but like how we do something is like 80% of the thing that we're actually doing. And like we don't need more things in this world that are like saying they're about a certain thing, but like the feeling isn't there. And like the feeling is about the places of connection, the feeling is about congruence, and having those like be matching, I think is actually a really important part of like the liberation that we're working towards, is a kind of congruence and resonance, which means telling the truth, and also sometimes means, you know, that can be super uncomfortable. So I just kind of wanted to name that.
Thank you, Elsa. I remember that very well. I was like, oh my God, we're in ritual. We're creating time. We don't need outlines. We don't need a watch. We're looking up and it's like, oh, it's good. So let's stop looking at the watch and let's just do what spirits and the ancestors are moving us to do. Yeah, it's a beautiful segue where you were saying how I was thinking of like just showing up really round and soft and open. And that makes me think of like my relationship with my ancestors and showing up with them, how it's important to not show up with this agenda of like, I gotta do this thing. I need to, whatever it is, whatever the languaging is right now around healing and being in relationship, but actually like showing up round and soft and being able to hold the way that they are desiring to meet you and your desire for connection and belonging. So it's important that we soften in these ways, because the ways of being really hard and just rigid, look at where we are. Like institutionally in this country, everything that has been happening that is coming to light, hard, rigid, fragile, like how do we approach with some softness now and to be open for what wants to emerge and be birthed? So it feels really important to name that, because it's, I think, an integral part of how we come into deep relationship and we decolonize what our concept of relationship is and who our concept of family is. Because oftentimes in the structures in Western culture, we're only taught to value those that we see, which the ancestors don't necessarily fit into that picture because they're in spirit form. You know, we are the embodiment, like they get poured into us and we are a product of them. But we're not taught to value them. We're not taught to reach out. We're not taught to reach back. And sometimes in the way that healing work and work around healing has been co-opted, sometimes we're reaching out with an agenda or because we want something and we want access to stories that, even though we're descendants, sometimes they're not ours to know. Like we don't have ownership over those things. And so how do we approach with softness and relationship and being at ease and not having an agenda? So all those bits and all those pieces feel like they pour into the ancestors and coming correct, so to speak. It's like terminology my grandma used is like, you better come correct with me. She used to say that when we were little. But like showing up well and showing up open. And part of that is like being available for what wants to emerge in those ways. And I'm super heartened, because we're on the subject of ancestors, so many people now who are feeling the pull to turn around and to receive that support and ask, who's behind me? Like, whose shoulders am I standing on? Who's praying for me? Like, how did I get here? Like, all those really big questions. It's really heartening. And I feel like when we think about the cosmology of spirituality in Western culture, the ancestors are like the most underutilized forces. Literally, people will pray to the angels, the 8th dimensional beings, but they will not call on their own people who have come into bodies, who know what it's like to be human, who are literally holding down ritual and prayer in a whole nother realm for you to be here, who have sponsored your trip here. Like people will call on all these other beings other than their own ancestors who are like very much alive. Even though they don't have bodies, they're alive. Even though we can't hear them in the ways that we have been conditioned to hear, like through sound, they're praying for us. They're speaking prayers over us. Like they're in this larger web of creation, right? And they don't exist in the ways that solely just having personhood and personality, but also through nature and through the elements. Like the earth is also like our oldest living ancestor. This is the one that has given us the gift of these bodies that house our spirits. So how do we soften and turn around and look below us and feel whose bodies we are standing on and welcome them in and invite them in and have capacity and space for the relationship? And what does relationship even look like? I mean, that's a whole nother thing in Western cultures, the niceties, the pleasantries. It's also messy, it's sticky, there's grief work, there's accountability, there's all these bits and pieces that are an invitation to sit with and to reweave when we are wanting to come into real deep relationship and connection with our people and with the earth. And with that, I'll pause and let Elsa get some language in there.
I just love listening to you speak and pray, Tamira. It just like feels so good in my body when I listen to you. I was thinking about like what helps us be soft, and like also what you were saying, like forgetting that everything's like a two or more than two-way relationship. I was talking with someone a couple weeks ago, and I was helping them like facilitate a ritual of saying goodbye to the land that they had lived on for a long time because they were moving to another place. And I was so struck. They were like, oh, I never thought of like what the land wants from me. I just thought of like what I was like. And it's this like colonized view of like, oh, like nature's so pretty. Like I like that tree, or like I like being on this, like living rurally. And it's like, no, like this is not a one way. Like I feel like white culture trains white people to see everything as an object, and like everything's like, if it's material, then it's real. If it's written in a book, then it's true. And like everything's an object, and not seeing like actually everything's alive, actually everything is connected, and like the land wants something from us. Like it's not just this like object relationship that we're like taking from. And I think that like not only is it in various forms can be very violent, but it's also like this cutting off at the root of like, do we actually feel like we belong? I had a really interesting conversation last week with a bunch of friends where we were talking about like, how do we relate to the word and feeling of belonging? Like, where do we feel like we belong? And some people felt like they belonged with people or certain places they felt that. Some people didn't feel it at all. For my Jewish ancestors who have been in diaspora for 2,000 to 2,500 years, like when I am around Jews, like we're always talking about belonging and like how we don't feel that and how to feel that. I feel like Judaism is so organized around like, I guess like contemporary Judaism has been so organized for, 2,000 plus years around how to maintain a sense of belonging away from the land that we were used to being on and like so rooted in. And like I know for myself, like I've never really felt like I belonged on this land. I always knew that I kind of wasn't supposed to be here. I feel like really privileged in that, I mean, I have a lot of privilege in terms of power systems of oppression, but also really such a gift to be brought up by parents who are teaching me about colonization, like from the jump. Like I didn't have to have that experience of like, oh, I'm in college and like learning the real history and like I can't believe everyone lied to me. I was aware of this my whole learning and development time. So I never felt like I belonged here. And so it feels like some of the like disconnection from ancestors is about like, oh, I don't know that I want to feel the pain of like, how do I feel about my immediate family? Like, were my grandparents like nice and loving? Like, maybe they weren't. And like, and then that impulse to like go somewhere else, to like someone else's tradition, and to think like, I don't have a tradition. Like that hasn't been my story. I always had a tradition and was raised in Eastern European Jewish culture, but I see that happening for people. Like they think that they don't have a tradition, but that's like white people. We think like, oh, we don't have like, we're just the normative supreme human being, and therefore we have nothing. And it's like, this edge of like the benefit and advantage of white body supremacy, and then this like that's really just like covering up this intense like pit of horror, disgust, remorse, regret, like that also has like so much pain and disconnection, and it's like layered. It's like our own pain, and then it's like the violence that I've perpetuated onto other people. And like, I think part of what's happening is like, we have to feel that. If we don't feel that, like there isn't a way forward. And like, you can't build a house on like a foundation that's been eaten away. Like you can't make like a healthy home on like rotten wood. You have to like let that go and compost it back into the earth and like start anew. And I don't necessarily know how to do that like in this whole country, but I feel like I know how to do that in myself, which is like I have to build up my own internal sense of like, I am okay. And like I can belong to myself. I can belong to my ancestors. Like I'm not fundamentally bad. Like so many of us walk around feeling like I'm kind of bad inside, and whether it's because we're white and we know our ancestors have done fucked up shit and we're bad or did bad things, and we think that our spirits are like not retrievable or like so far gone, but then like instead of actually being in that pain, we like cover it up and push it onto other people. So like building up that sense of like, oh, I actually can like be here and I'm fundamentally good. I fundamentally can belong. And like that actually, that kind of self-love is actually what supports being willing to be accountable and being willing to be with the truth. Cause like, I know like me at my worst is like very defended and like already feels like I'm bad. So if someone comes to me with like, hey, I want to let you know how you're impacting me, I'm like already with the like counter and like, I don't want to hear it. But it's because I'm already walking around like criticizing myself and feeling bad. And like, that's not like liberatory. That prevents me from showing up for a liberatory experience and encounter that would allow me then to receive the truth of what someone is sharing. And like that's, we all need from our own positionality, from whatever. Some people are already super good at that, and that's awesome. And like any of us who have that defendedness in our heart, like I only talk about stuff that I'm struggling with myself. Like sometimes people are like, oh, you talk about this stuff, and like, I'm like, I'm not gonna say something on social media or publicly if it's not something that I'm like practicing. And it doesn't mean I'm practicing in this like awesome way. I'm like struggling with it like in my personal life, like, okay, what does my defended heart need to like drop that wall and deepen into? Because like that is what makes me like moving towards being a trustworthy person, like someone who's really defended in their heart and is like running this energy of like, I'm bad and I'm criticizing myself, and like that person's not trustworthy. And like we know it in our bodies implicitly, and we know it through relationship, like, oh, can I have a real conversation with this person? And like so much of encounters are like people aren't having like not saying what is actually happening, and then it's just perpetuating this like growing dissonance between what we're talking about and what we're feeling. And like talk about developmental trauma, like that's such a deep theme of personal, interpersonal, and then collective trauma, is that lack of congruence. And that's why one of the things I loved, I mean, I love everything about this uprising that's happening and like this blooming in this moment of continued civil rights movement. And like I loved all the toppling of the statues, because it's like we're not pretending anymore that these people are someone to look up to, and like we're telling the truth that they're like genocidal, like basically like fascists or genocidal leaders of some sort who are empowered by a genocidal system. And like we don't want those statues in our streets anymore. So I'll pause there because I said a lot.
Just appreciating your sharing, Elsa. The statues, yes. Like that act of like, not here, not anymore. Like we're not gonna do this anymore. Like the act of doing that is really, really powerful. And I love what you said about making compost. Like I think that's something that we can all do, regardless of where we are within the system, the institutionalized system of whiteness. And I know this is something that for me has been really helpful. And Rebecca Bennett, who's an SDI, is just amazing, talks all the time about like, how do we make something out of this shit? Like, how do we turn it into compost and like grow? And like, where's the transformation happening? And for me, it's like a willingness to actually get our hands in the shit and like put it in the garden and plant seeds. Like that. And I'm like, let's not run away from our transformation. We've come here for our souls to transform. We've come here to grow. Everything about this place is temporary. So like, let's not act in this mode of like being guided and moved by the temporary, but like, what is the eternal? What is the infinite? And that is like being in a practice in a relationship with liberation and freedom and healing, right? Like all the other collapse and the fear and the I'm bad and I'm good, even on the moral high ground of like, I am good, I am righteous, like all that, it's like temporary, right? Is your soul growing? If you come back in a white body in another lifetime, then what? You know? Or like all these bigger questions of like, how do we show up in the spirit of liberation and be willing to remember that this place is temporary, it's super beautiful, and we came here to grow. How do we make this place a better place for other people to come and grow, right? The people alongside us, so their transformation is not rooted in suffering, rooted in dehumanization, but like they get to come here and have the experiences they need to grow without like suffering totally, right? Like there are some bits of suffering in life that happen, but all the extra stuff that are holding up these institutions of whiteness and institutions of just shittiness and patriarchy and all the things, like let them crumble so we can stop. And I use this as a collective human we, because when those things begin to topple and to crumble, there's grief under that. All the people that are walking around embodying racism, xenophobia, homophobia, what are the parts of yourself that you're not making space for, that you get to channel into these modes of like cultural wounding and harm that are then feeding into the institutions that like our world is set up around and based around? Like when you start bringing that stuff down, you start breaking it down, there's grief. Like what are the parts of yourself that you're running away from that are being displaced onto other bodies through acts of hate? I'll stop right there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I want to talk again some more about discomfort. And like sometimes when I talk about this stuff, other white people will be like, that doesn't feel good. Or like they're not gonna say that doesn't feel good, but you can tell in like how people steer conversations, like, oh, I don't want to feel uncomfortable. And it's like, we don't get to feel comfortable. Like that's not what this lifetime is about. And like any like memories or orientation to comfort was like literally predicated on chattel slavery labor. And like you don't get to be comfortable. And it was real interesting because like in the first couple months of the shelter in place order, I was staying with my parents, and I've always been into genealogy and kind of like I'm a researcher. I can go into that like hyper focus mode and like dive deep on a subject. So I got like more into doing some genealogy research. And like I said earlier, my dad comes from Sephardi and Eastern European Jewish people, and his culture was really like the culture that we grew up in. I think because my mom was like white and from white Northern and Western European people who kind of had that like, I don't really have a culture. So we just kind of like were raised in my dad's. And but I started doing research, especially on like my grandmother's dad's side. And like I had kind of pretended that part of the family didn't exist because like there was some abuse between my grandmother and her dad. And so everyone was kind of like, okay to be like, we're cutting off from this person. But like, just because I have a boundary with that ancestral lineage, or had up until recently a boundary with that ancestral lineage, like, I don't know you guys, I don't want to have anything to do with you. You don't feel safe when I feel you close. So I'm going to like make this boundary, which I did for like a bunch of years, which I think is okay. Like that was for my own safety and protection at that time. But like I'm growing. And so then I was like, actually, like I do want to know you. And like pretending that you're not part of my family, like doesn't make it go away. It doesn't like heal them. It doesn't heal me. Like sometimes you need to do that as like a triage situation. Like it's not the time to do that work, but like be courageous. I'm speaking to myself and others, like be courageous when you actually can do that work. And I think that we can do more than we think we do. Like people will be like, that doesn't feel good. And it's like, yeah, but we do hard things all the time. Like people learn new things all the time. And okay, I'm pausing because I want to talk about like 4 things at once, and that's literally not possible. So I want to come back to a thing about like, I want to talk with you about like ways of connecting with ancestors and not getting like sucked into dogmatism and like into the way. So I'm bookmarking that we can come back to that. Because it's much more of like an open source thing. Like you don't need to have someone tell you how to do it. But I want to stay on this track about, so I did all this research about that part of my family, and they come from like a very powerful English, like monarchy family that is like very traceable. Turns out English people with power are very interested in like writing down their genealogy and publishing it in books and making sure those books get published and then like putting those books on Google. So as a Jewish person where there was like such a lack of written history about my family, and it was like, well, we didn't even have last names. Like we were forced to have last names. That's not part of our tradition. I was like, oh, this is like a whole other vibe to do ancestry research when from like English ancestors. It's very documented. So I did all this research, and then I find out like, oh my gosh, I'm not just like a white passing Jewish person. I'm like white. Like they were legit like coming to Plymouth to like colonize and murder Mashpee Wampanoag people. Like this isn't just like this conceptual thing of like, yeah, I'm not into colonization. Like that's literally the people whose like body I come from like did that. And like not that long ago. And even if it was like 1,000 years ago, that's still very much alive in my body, but it wasn't even that long ago. And then some of those people went on to enslave Black people in chattel slavery in the South, in Virginia. And like, that's really real. And like, that didn't feel good in my body to feel that. But like, it's not about feeling good. And like, it's a practice to keep deepening into like, am I willing to actually feel what that feels like how that lives in me now? But also, how are they doing? Like, once I connected in with them, like, they started, like Tamira was saying, like, the ancestors are doing their own prayers and ritual. And like, some of them are like super integrated and can be like elders and guides. And some of them are like still like those ancestors specifically were like just starting to be like, once I started paying attention and connecting with them, they were like, oh, fuck, like we actually did that. I don't know if it's okay to swear on SDI programs, so maybe I won't again, but just came out that time. But like, oh, we did that. And then like, it's such a gift to witness. They're like ongoing, like it's still working on it. It's not like that you like heal that in like a day. Like their ongoing process of like feeling the intensity of what they did, the like, you know, intense impact at that time, but also how that impact has rippled out. And like if I didn't be with that process, I would miss out on like how that's transforming me. And it actually doesn't serve us to like pretend that our ancestors aren't involved in that if we are like white European colonial settler descendants. Like it's good for us to be transformed by that. It's good for them. It helps them if we like recognize that. I do actually think that it supports them to be in their own like I want to say repair process, but like before you even get to a repair process, you have to feel like the impact of what you've done. And like when I'm witnessing my ancestors in that, they're like can't even kind of like stay in their ancestral form and feel the horror of like what they've done. And so they're in their own process. And like I trust them. And like part of what's awesome about ancestors is like they don't really work as like individuals. Like they're not in this delusion of individualism that like white body supremacy teaches us to be. Like I'm this and like I'm separate from things, and like if I achieve something it's like because I'm so awesome. And it's actually like no, we actually move as like collectives and as groups. And the ancestors are such good teachers about that, because like when I connect with my ancestors, I'm never like seeing this one lone person telling me a thing. It's like the whole crew shows up, and maybe one of them is like kind of speaking for the crew so that it's like, you know, easier to have that dialogue. But it's like they can do that healing work as a group of people together. And when I connect with ancestors and like just in my like modes of perception, I'm very visual, and so the language that I speak about it is very visual because I have that like gift of kind of that inner sight. But that's not like a special thing that I have. Like I think a lot of people have that gift and it can be like cultivated or remembered. Like I think a lot of schooling and like white body supremacy sort of attitudes of materialism like train people to shut that down when they're kids. And I was just like lucky that I didn't have that shut down in me. And then also people connect in other ways, like they can feel it in their body, or they like hear things, or they notice synchronicities. Some people have like deep dream practice, like in Eastern European Jewish like mystical culture and Sephardi mystical culture, there's like a lot about dreaming, and that dreaming is like a place where real interactions with ancestors and other people happen. So I don't want to like, I'm naming that because I don't want people to think that that like inner sight is a privileged way of being. It's just like I reflected in my speech because that's how I am. So I'll pause there.
I'm curious to check with Matt if there have been any questions, because Elsa and I have had some space here with one another, but also we've said a lot. And I'm curious if folks listening have had questions about what we've talked about so far.
Yeah, a lot of just a lot of affirmation for what you both have been sharing. Thank you so much. This is really rich so far. Just affirmations in the chat. Self-love is what builds capacity for being accountable. I'd be interested to hear more about that. You know, particularly for those of us doing some composting around race and ancestry and colonial history, how to practice self-compassion, self-love as we are also, choosing discomforts, for those of us privileged who don't necessarily have to do that. Let's see, we've come here for our souls to transform. Love the thread of soul gardening, mulching, composting, and growing. Being with the pain is the only way to move forward. Yeah, let's see. Maybe you could share a little bit about self-care practice. Do you imagine most of us reach a point where it's like, this is too heavy. This is so overwhelming. And I wonder if you are good at sensing that in yourselves. I'm good at letting that feeling of overwhelm kind of just be my state of being without recognizing that I need to sort of pull back and take care of myself and be tender. I wonder how you discern that for yourselves. Yeah.
I'll share. And Lizzie also, hi Lizzie, had a question in the same vein around what are practices for softening when you feel tense and you feel hard. And I think for myself, I keep coming back to this practice of breath, coming back to this practice of like, am I actually breathing? And in the moments where I feel really hard and really tense, like I'm not. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm literally holding my breath in those moments. And I think the same can be said, like when I'm not having compassion for myself, I find myself in this place of urgency and like rapid breathing and like, gotta get this thing done, especially when we're talking about everything that's happening regarding race, like everything that everyone is reckoning with, not just white body people, but like Black, brown, and indigenous people. How have we internalized depression? How have we perpetrated that in our own communities, right? How have we been conditioned into doing that? So being present with those bigger things, for myself, a part of my self-care is like, one, really slowing down, because this is not going to be solved overnight. So like the urgency of like, go do this thing and go beat yourself up or like just fall into this pit of despair, it's actually not helpful. It's not useful, right? And so turning into breath work, what is my internal resourcing? Like my ancestors, like calling on them to be with me and to help me to remember, like even in the simplest times. I remember when George Floyd happened, when he was murdered by the police, and I got on Facebook and people were like posting the video. And I was just like, oh my God, like I can't even like log on to my social media without like being in this space of just like being triggered. And it was over a series of days. I would like try to log in at some point to like check something, and it was just like inundated like over and over and over again. And I got into this space of like being in a trauma response really for 2 weeks. And it was like, I wasn't even doing the basic things. I wasn't drinking water. I wasn't eating. I was like feeling this hypervigilance thing. So all the practices that I know to keep myself grounded, like taking a shower, even crying and grieving, moving my body, like I wasn't doing any of those things because I'm like, somebody's coming after me. Like I can't even leave the house right now. Like what's going to happen if I get pulled over, right? So I'm like in this full on trauma response. And breathing, I connected with a friend who was like, how's your breath? And I was like, what? You're asking me about my breath? Like, do you understand what's happening? And they're like, yeah. And you can't, like, the only thing you can do is like breathe in order to actually do something else. And like, are you breathing? How's your breath? How's your heart? And I'm just like not connected to those things because I'm out here in the ethers where it feels safer than actually being present with what was actually a lot of grief and a lot of fear for me. So the practice of the breath is like when the breath is present and it's soft and it's not forced and it's round and I can feel it. I can breathe into my toes. Like I can breathe into these places in my body where I have feeling. Like that is something that helps me to come into embodied presence. And when I'm in embodied presence, I can listen to my body and figure out what it is needing around self-care, and checking in with my spirit to know, like, what does my spirit need in this moment? Do I need to go like prepare a ritual foot bath outside with herbs and flowers? Does my body want me to drink some tea, to put on something warm, to lay on a heating pad, to cry? Like like, how do I connect myself and to be present with like what my body and my spirit actually need? And breath is that like mode in that way. I love Michelle Johnson does this really beautiful work around dismantling racism, and has a book, Skill in Action, which is amazing. But she talks about, how do we keep breathing in this system that wants to take our breath away? And that's what it does. It takes our breath away. So we're fighting and we're clawing for air. We're moving out of these instincts for where we're not like in embodied presence and we're grounded. It's just like the hand is just getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and we're losing breath. And so it's from this place of like panic and disembodiment that we're acting and moving into the world, and oftentimes causing more harm, right? Because we're actually not stopping to be present and being with our breath and being embodied. So those bits feel very foundational in my own practice around like being soft with myself, is like actually being soft, letting my belly be soft and hold breath, letting my back be soft and my shoulders be soft and hold breath. And then from that place of being grounded, asking, in this moment, what am I being asked to do? And knowing that I have support, like embodied people, and also my crew, because I roll deep, that are with me, and calling on them and inviting them in. And when I'm in these places of hypervigilance and like in trauma response, I don't remember. It's just like, I'm going to go out here. There's nobody, like nobody can help me. I have no support. Oh my God, I'm going to die. And so we just have to come back through breath. Yeah.
I love the question, how is your breath? Like what, I'm going to use that. So,
do you even know where it is in your body right now? Sometimes when people get stuck in a response, it's like, notice, how's your breath? Like, what is the quality and where is it in your body? And if you're like, you don't know, well, you're probably not connected to your breath right now. So let's take a moment and notice.
Yeah. At the end here, if you like, I would love for you to maybe guide us through an exercise in that. Help us identify the breath and where it is in our body. That would be a great practice here. Elsa, there's a question here. I can't actually see who it's from because my mouse is being weird, but it says, I have done the exercise trying to invite an ancestor to come be present with me. I don't know a lot about my ancestry. I haven't felt or seen an ancestor. Can you talk about some ways to approach this? You're both welcome to respond.
Yeah, is it okay if I talk about presence a little bit and then we get into that question? Because I want to pick up that, I don't want to leave that thread. And then we'll get to, I love that question. There's a critique of somatics and trauma healing that I want to uplift, that's like looking at some somatics and trauma healing work is about like helping people get regulated. And I feel like it's actually kind of problematic to have this focus on regulation. And then also this, like, unfortunately, not all, but many somatics teachers and trauma healing teachers are white. And like the white body supremacy as expressed through trauma healing work is like, at least in my training, not accounted for at all. And I don't see it accounted for in many places. And so then this like idea of what regulation looks like has this like real deep oppression woven through it. And I love what Tamira is saying about presence, because I think that's actually what we're talking about. Like, and because going back to Matt, what you were saying about like, how do you know when it's like too much and you're wanting to be just uncomfortable, but also if you get flooded, like it comes back to like, am I present? Can I be present with this? If I can't be present with it, like nothing's going to transform. Like I don't heal, I don't like learn, I don't grow when I'm not present with something. And like my ancestors aren't like growing and transforming when I'm like dissociated or disconnected from myself or from them. like transformation happens through presence. That's actually like in my own personal belief and sort of like personal theology, like presence is like what we call God, or what we call all these different, like with all our different like words and different languages and cultures. That's just an English word that a lot of people know. Like that is the presence that like when we gather together emerges. And that's what's healing. Like in my private practice, I tell my clients all the time, like, I'm not special. I like don't know a special thing that you don't know that's going to heal you. Like what emerges in the space by us being together is what metabolizes and transforms and is experienced as healing. So I don't like this like dichotomy between like I'm uncomfortable, or is it too much, or am I flooded? It's just like coming back to like what Tamira is saying, like, am I present and can I be present with this? And like if I can't, let me do some things that help me be present again. And then if I am, like, keep feeling it. Like one of my teachers, Anna Chitty, who I love, I learned so much from her, and really my somatic work is my expression of what I've learned from her. She teaches about like through the wound is the thing that you most deeply want. And the goal of healing is not about getting regulated. It's about increasing our capacity for presence and what we can be present with. And like because of trauma, what we can be present with can get like really narrowed. And it's about, can we expand that and hold more and be with more and witness more, like more of ourselves? Like what are we holding back because we're like not able to be present with ourselves? More of other people, more energies, our ancestors, big feelings moving through a space. And so yeah, I just want to uplift that emphasis on like expanding our capacity to be present, and knowing that we can practice and learn tools from each other. And really, like, I love, Tamira, what you were saying of like relationships with other people, with like dear ones that you trust, and relationships with ancestors as a resource of what helps us get present again, so that we can show up to whatever work is ours, like from our own positionality in our personal and professional lives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So did another question come in that would be good to hear about now, or should we go with that question that you asked before?
Well, Sharon I was interested in having Tamira respond to the ancestor question. What are some ways to listen for the ways ancestors are speaking?
Yeah, I think I see it in the chat. A
Right.
person had, sorry, I want to frame it so I can like answer it like fully, right, with what they're asking me. It says, I've done exercise trying to invite an ancestor to come be present with me. I don't know a lot about my ancestry. I haven't felt or seen an ancestor. Can you talk about some ways to approach this? Okay, I got a lot of things I'd love to share right now. So just based on the question that you've asked, through a lens of like decolonization, your people are never not with you. They are present with you always. And what we're learning how to do when we come into a relationship is attune ourselves to the ways that they show up, attune ourselves to their presence so that we can hear them. So they're always with you, right? It's almost like a dial on a radio station where you're trying to get through where you don't have the static. And in order to connect with your people, you don't have to know anything. You don't have to have any kind of written record about your people. And again, this is like a decolonial practice, because in Western European culture, Elsa was just saying like how finely documented people's ancestry and all this stuff is. And it's like, there are these other stories and these other transmissions of knowledge that are like through oral tradition, through the descendants that come from the line. Like your ancestors, Ashe, their power and their stories have been poured into this body that you're holding. Like all of that is inside of you, right? And it's relearning and remembering how to tune into that and to be available to the wisdom and to everything that's there, so you don't actually have to know anything about your ancestry. at all. Like you don't have to have any written records because your people are there and they're with you, and it's a new mode of communication and being in relationship that we have to actually fine tune and create capacity for, so that we can be available to be on the frequency that they're on and to hear them. Also said, I haven't felt or seen an ancestor. And sometimes you don't actually see them visually. Sometimes they show up as energy. Sometimes people have the gift of sight where they can see spirits and beings like that. And other times you just hear them and you just feel them energetically. But what I was saying about the breath ties back into this. I think it's important to be in a place of embodied presence constantly, and especially when we're seeking to make connection with our people, being soft and open and round and not coming with an agenda or an expectation. And even if the thing doesn't happen in the way that we're thinking it's supposed to happen, right? That's an expectation in itself and it limits our capacity. So how can we come almost in imagination, like in the richness of our imagination, just to be open and available for the ways that we don't even know that they could show up. Like we couldn't even dream of how they would show up. So I want to encourage you, one, to keep leaning in and to talk to your people out loud, to your bright, well, loving people, address them, tell them you love them, tell them you want to deepen in relationship and connection with them, and like be direct with them. Just like you would anybody you're in like a really loving relationship with. Like, I love you. I'm here. My heart is open and I'm listening. Like, guide my steps. Help me to be in a space where I can be in deeper relationship with you. Show me how to do this. Be available for it. And don't be caught up in the ways that everybody else is doing it, because your mode of connection might not look like everybody else's. So coming into embodied presence, talking to them, speaking to them, like directly, and naming your intent and your desire for connection is super huge. They respond to that. Like they'll be like, oh my God, they remembered us. And then you might be like, oh my God, I just had the craziest dream. You know, they may come through in dreams. They may come through in other people who come and give you messages, the people that are showing up in your lives, the things that are opening, the pathways that are opening, if it's like even a book or like some other practice that helps you to become more embodied. So like, oh my gosh, I did this other thing. This somatic person was offering an embodiment practice and I did it. And oh my God, I totally connected this time. It didn't happen like that before. So just being open to the ways that they show up and knowing that there's not a one size fits all process and approach to being in connection and in relationship with your people. So yeah, lean in, let them know you want to be in connection, talk to them, like be in communication with them, and be in embodied presence and listen. It doesn't hurt to actually like, which I think is actually really powerful. It doesn't hurt to just practice being in embodied presence. Practice holding this intention and even speaking to them throughout the day or whenever you feel moved to, and sitting down and listening. Not saying anything, but like sitting down and just listening. Being in embodied presence and just listening. Seeing who shows up. It's a really powerful practice and way of being. So that.
Thank you. We've got roughly between 10 and 15 minutes left in this call, and I'm wondering, I would love for us to share some practice together. If either or both of you would like to facilitate us through breathing, through centering, through inviting ancestors, or even just letting them know that like, hey, I'm here and I love you and want to be with you. However you want to facilitate that, I think I would appreciate that. People would appreciate it.
Can I say something before you move to that about in response to that question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
So like I come from on my Jewish family, like I come in that I was raised in like an intact animist tradition, so we have a lot of ancestor practices. And then also on the other side of my family is like white European people who don't is not this not an intact animist tradition, because like the colonization of those people was like so long ago and they haven't maintained it. That's like a whole other discussion of why. But so I like have the gift of those traditions, and then also can feel into the layer of like what it feels like to be like, I don't have like a thing that I can do that is like from my people. But one thing I want to say about that is like, look closely at like what your family is into. Like so often stuff is overlooked and people feel like, oh, I don't have a way. But it's like, is your family like, are people in your family into like baking bread? Like, do they make special foods? Do they like quilt? Do they sing? Like, all those are ancestral connection practices. Like, being connected to your ancestors is not this like special thing that is like with so much like bling and like in a special room with all this special cool stuff. Like, you don't need, like, that's not what this is about. It's not this like high drama thing. It's about like in your everyday life. Like, that's something I learned from growing up in Jewish culture, is like we have blessings for like basically everything you do. You could be like saying a blessing about, but it's about like bringing your ancestors into like, oh, we're eating food now, we're baking bread, we saw a rainbow, we're saying hello to someone, we really like our new jacket that we got. Like, there are blessings for all of those things. And it's like, bring it into the everyday, like Tamira saying, like pause and listen in, and like you can like praise your ancestors or be like, I love you, or like, this is an offering to you. And like literally anything you're doing, it's not this like set aside, like I do this like other life, and then like sometimes I connect with my ancestors in this like separate way. And look at what people call like folk traditions. Look at, like I was saying, like, do people like make things with their hands? Do they know a lot about like wood or carving? Or are they carpenters? Or do they know about songs? Are they musicians? Do they know about how to grow plants? Like, those are ancestral practices that aren't just about like the production value or like what something makes, but it's also about the practice of doing it. And that's probably something that's in your lineage, like what you're naturally good at, what you're naturally interested in. That's probably connected to like a gift that's been passed through your lineage for thousands of years, that have like really ancient roots, that like you have that in you. And that so much like has gone underneath colonization, gone underneath white body supremacy, and like you can find those parts that are intact in your family and in your lineage. And like we're just taught to like not really value those things or look at those things because they're like basically not good for capitalism. But part of this transformative work and practice of like really re-inhabiting ourselves and being connected to our who we come from and living, like having them live through us in that way, is kind of picking up and revaluing and seeing those practices for what they are.
Yeah, I love that. I love thinking that I can go for a walk or bake bread or doodle in a sketchbook, and that is communicating with ancestors. That probably there's somebody in my family's history who enjoyed those things too. And, that through those practices, like we are communing, that I am in conversation with them. Thank you. So helpful. This is great. I'm just sort of marinating in the wisdom that you both have shared, and I think we all are, and just super grateful to get to be here as you've held space for us. Can we do a little practice together? Can you guide us through some things? I would love that.
I'm going to throw in one more thing, what Elsa was saying. Even through the tending of the body is ancestral reverence and practice, taking care of the body, celebrating the body that you have, that people have sacrificed and died for you to have. that's housing your soul. That's like a reverence practice for your ancestors, is taking really good care of yourself.
Tamira, do you want to start with the practice and we can kind of just like weave it together?
Totally. Yeah. So I'm going to invite folks wherever they are to take a moment and to get comfortable. If you need to shift in your seat, you need to look around the room to feel safe, see where that exit and that door is, do so, turn around behind you. Notice what's in the room around you. Once you've had a sense to take in and connect with your surroundings, I'm going to invite you to have your eyes opened or closed, whatever is supportive and nourishing for you. As you're settling in your body, there's an invitation to turn your attention inwards. You might take a moment to just notice how your body is feeling in the space that you're in right now. And as you're noticing how your body feels, there's an invitation to just connect with your breath and notice where your breath is in your body. Is it in your belly, your hips? Where is your breath? When you have a sense of where your breath is in your body, there's an invitation to notice, what is the quality of my breath in this moment? Without story, without judgment. Just notice, is it deep and full? Is it shallow? Just notice.
From feeling the center, from the center of your being, just staying with yourself in your center and opening your perception so that you come from many people, that you are their dreams and the embodiment of their prayers, and they lived complicated, layered, nuanced lives, and that you belong with them in a way probably deeper than any of us can comprehend. And just see what it's like stay with yourself. Don't expand beyond so far out that you lose that center, lose your home inside yourself. So staying with yourself and opening your perception. Maybe you feel that they're around you or behind you or below you or above. Notice what it's like to just expand to that general sense of your ancestors that you come from. And you still get to have yourself. You still get to have like a boundary around you that is your own space. You still get to have continual consent. There isn't that either or of like either you're merged or you're distant. And notice like what sense is strong for you when you expand that awareness, like we've been saying. You're gonna have your own way of perceiving. And even if like your mind doesn't believe it, that's okay. Your mind can have that feeling and thought. Let your mind and the physicality of your brain like rest, can rest on your heart. When we're developing embryologically, our brains are actually developing resting on the heart. And you can remember that support. We don't have to know something cognitively to experience it. And even if a sense of something is just like a little whisper, appreciate that whisper. Be curious about that. And be open to like now or in the coming days to that whisper growing in a stronger way that you can feel or perceive more easily. And just take time now to, you can say it inside or aloud. Like, what is your prayer for yourself, for others, for your people? Do you have a question? Do you have an intention? Do you have a dream? Do you need help with something? And just offer that to this collective or to that whisper. Notice where you can feel that breath again in your body, where you feel a trust. Even in the tumult of our world, is there like a deeper sense of trust in the deep time of the earth? That we've been here for like a short time and a long time. We're not just from the people of a couple hundred years ago, we're from people for a long time. And they've had intricate symbiotic relationships with the more than human world. And those kinship networks are also part of our ancestors and also part of what we can trust. We're one point in a large ecological field. And then come back to feeling breath, come back to feeling your center, feeling your intention or your prayer.
As you're coming back in a center, you can take your time with little movements if that's supportive. Opening your eyes, again, looking around the room, closing your practice in the way that you started, connecting with your environment. And in this space of ripeness and juiciness, while you're still tender and dropped in, I want to share 2 lines of poetry with you from an author named Bola Juju, who has a book called Witch Doctor Poet. And the lines, it's an excerpt of a poem, but the 2 lines says, "Nothing softens the wounds of your ancestors like the sweetness of your existence." Nothing softens the wounds of your ancestors like the sweetness of your existence.
Notice what happens in your body when you hear those words. And notice anything that was a moment in this time together where you felt touched or moved. You notice something pleasurable in your body or something relieving. And like notice, what was that sensation? Remember now what it feels like, where you felt it in your body. Because like that's real and that's there for you later. You can come back to what was pleasing to you in this time, or what hearing those words felt like, or what your breath felt like. Offering so much gratitude for this time. Thank you to my ancestors and all that, all those energies and beings and people who were with me and with us. And thank you to Matt and his ancestors and the ancestors of Path of SDI that created this organization that made this space. The ancestors of Tamira, the ancestors of the places that we're on, the ancestors of all the people who are listening and have listened. Thank you for allowing us, like any moment that we get to be in ourselves and be connected is so precious. And we hope that if there was any misstep that I took, that I will know about that and can repair that, and anything that was pleasing to any of these ancestors we've named, that this is nourishing to y'all, that you can be fed by it and feel honored by what we're trying to do and what we've talked about and felt and done together. And my prayer is for everyone listening to feel that deep sense of belonging in yourself, a sense of safety, like just within yourself, not trying to pretend the world is safe for you, but just to feel at home inside. And prayers that whatever is your intention or prayer, or longing to connect with your people, or what you're wanting or hoping for or dreaming of, that you could feel that, and that the conditions that support that emergence are fortified and nourished. And I pray for my own defended heart to keep softening so I can be more and more aligned with truth and more contributing in my commitment to justice. That we move together in our commitments to justice.
May all those that are present and all those that will hear this transmission come away with more questions about who their people are. May those that listen feel the expansion of their family to include their ancestors that love them, that are praying for them, that want to be in really deep, nourishing relationship with them. May we find, all of us, may we find liberation through those relationships.
Tamira, thank you. Elsa, thank you. To everyone who's here, thank you for sharing your practice with us, for sharing breath with me and with one another. Thank you for being a part of this community of spiritual companionship. And may you go in deeper conversation with with your ancestors, and in deeper conversations with your hearts, your true self. And be curious, and find companions to do the composting with. Ask people how their breath is. Ask them how their heart is. Be good journeyers and travelers with one another. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
All right, I'm going to close this call, and blessings everybody, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you.